Hello, my name is Jen Phipps and I'm a lecturer in Criminology in the Department of Law and Criminology at Aberystwyth University. The purpose of this session is to introduce you to issues surrounding terrorism. What we're going to look at in this brief video is how the psychology of terrorism impacts on our lives. This is part of a talk for a wider session for a workshop that I would encourage you to attend on the 7th of July. So what's the purpose of the session? I have a multidisciplinary background. I started off by studying law at undergraduate level. I then did a degree and master's degree in criminology and forensic psychology, and I've done a lot of work in relation to policing. So today we're going to consider terrorism from this multidisciplinary background, and we're going to look at how terrorism impacts upon us in society. And why do we do this? For a multitude of reasons, but the reason that I got into criminology in the first instance was to try and get a better understanding of why crime takes place. Why do people commit acts of terrorism? How can we stop people from committing acts of terrorism to safeguard communities? This is to try and help the police to prevent these future acts of terrorism. Also to consider the future radicalization of young people into terrorist organizations. And as much as possible, minimize the harms caused by the threat or indeed fear of terrorism. So what is terrorism? It really depends on where you are and from what perspective you're looking at this. Here's a governmental definition, so the UK definition, and you can see here it constitutes terrorism is the use or threat of action. So it's not just violence, the threat of action is sufficient, both in and outside of the UK. So we've got our own internal terrorist threats, but indeed external terroristic threats. And the purpose really here, and what distinguishes terrorism from other types of violence, is that terrorism is designed to influence any international government, organisation, or indeed to intimidate the public. It must also be for the purpose of advancing a political, religious, racial, or ideological cause. So not just random acts of violence that might implement or cause fear. One of the issues that we have with terrorism is that depending on what side you stand, you might have a very different perspective on whether or not the group that is committing the act are indeed terroristic. And our perceptions of terrorism do shift throughout time in relation to how the group or indeed individuals involved are perceived. As you can see here, it's a picture of Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was indeed considered to be a terrorist, later goes on to be the president of South Africa. Another difficulty that we have, and which we will consider in the workshop, is how the use of the term terrorism is manipulated by governments to try and control or indeed police, monitor certain groups. So Gaynor's quote here, "One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter," very much gives us the idea that depending on what side of the fence you're standing, whether or not you perceive that group to be terroristic. And I've got some examples here. So I've mentioned Nelson Mandela. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but he was one of the first to encourage that his group or their group at the time took up arms to use violence to get their cause heard and to fight for their rights. Women, the suffragette movement, they were considered terroristic in terms of the acts of violence and use of terror that they supposedly used to gain rights for women. The abolitionist movement, they were considered terroristic and in the end they ended slavery. And indeed former members of the IRA, so that's the Irish Republican Army, who were later given a voice through a political party, Sinn Féin, during this came from the Good Friday Peace Agreement in Easter of 1998. And now Sinn Féin are a leading political party, both within the Republic of Ireland and indeed the North of Ireland, and have quite a stronghold in relation to being able to push their views through in a non-terroristic manner, or arguably non-terroristic. So what constitutes a terrorist attack? Again, this is it can be a multitude of violence or indeed threats of violence. So the classic, which I'm sure you're all aware of, bombings, armed assaults, kidnappings, hijackings, barricade type events and assassinations. But other types of terroristic attacks. So the picture here is actually, well, it's from a film directed by Stephen Queen called Hunger, 2008. But it's the story of Bobby Sands and colleagues who were part of the Irish Republican Army in the 1970s, 1980s. And these men were arrested under the terroristic or terrorism laws, which had them incarcerated, and they believed they should be treated as political prisoners, but they were treated as terrorists. And so what they did was they did a hunger strike, and you might wonder, why would you do a hunger strike? Why hurt yourself? And again, this is something we will consider in the workshop, but their hunger strike led to the death of 11 inmates. So no others were hurt as part of that terroristic attack, but indeed it had a massive effect on the support for their cause. Which is why the British government considered it terroristic, because of the attention that it was given. So what's the aim of terrorism then? Now, again, just to reiterate, it does very much depend on the terroristic group and what their cause is, be it a political or ideological agenda. So you need to look at the subsets of terrorism to get a better understanding of that. But key and common across all terrorist organisations is the use of fear. And this is something, again, we're going to explore further in the workshop, looking at the manipulation of fear and how that impacts on governments, on the public at large, society, from both a local to indeed a global level. Sun Tzu's quote there, "Kill one, frighten 10,000." That really is the primary aim of terrorism, or certainly it was originally the primary aim. It's not that they wanted to hurt innocent people necessarily, but the aim really is to get recognition for their cause, again, whatever that might be. So if by killing one, they're getting the attention of the public, of governments, of the media, then that's working for them. You can see the quote here by Hall. The primary goal of terrorism is to disrupt society by provoking intense fear and shattering all sense of personal safety, personal and community safety. The target is an entire nation. So they're not just targeting the attention of government officials or indeed the police. They're looking to get the public's attention at large. And this is really, really important, because when we as in general public are worried about something, when we feel vulnerable, what we do is we make demands of our politicians, of our governments, of our police, asking them to safeguard and protect us. And that gives the terroristic organisations attention for their cause. Now, you might think negative attention, but any attention gives them, I suppose, an opportunity to promote what it is that they want people to know about, again, political, ideological, whatever that might be. Here's an example from 2006 of an alleged Al-Qaeda terrorist cell caught and recording by an MI5 discussing their plans to blow up the Ministry of Sound nightclub in London in order to take revenge. And you can see here those slags dancing around. So this is their perception of Western culture and Western beliefs and how we operate. So they wanted to get revenge on them. And you can see Akbar, who's part of that group, says the best thing you can do is put terror in their hearts. There is no doubt. There is nothing better than that. We put fear in their hearts. So they're trying to undermine our feelings of safety and security. And they do these acts in places where we should feel safe. So in a nightclub, young people drinking, dancing with their friends, having a nice time. But they want us to feel unsafe. They want us to feel that terror. They don't want us to feel secure. And this is giving them the attention that they want. So what's their primary aim? It's to implement fear. And you can see even from 1880, Johann Most, a German anarchist, he suggests outrageous violence will seize the imagination of the public and awaken its audience to political issues. Why am I showing you this quote? Well, this is quite critical. So this is 140 years ago, this quote, but nothing has changed. Outrageous violence. Now I want you to think about that. What constitutes outrageous violence today? So what it might have been in 1880 is very different today. And again, the workshop is going to explore how our perceptions of violence and terror have changed. Because they need to really commit a very tremendous act of outrageous violence to get the attention that they desire. Jenkins, 1975, he suggested terrorism is theatre. I love this quote, where the victim is the skin on a drum beaten to achieve a calculated impact on a wider audience. So it's not the people that perhaps get killed or injured in the act of terror, the act of violence, whatever it is that they're not the ones being targeted. They're you know, for them it's just collateral damage in terms of the greater political objective or ideological objective that they're trying to achieve. So there's a skin on a drum. So they're trying to beat this drum. They're trying to make noise for their cause, but they need people to be listening. That's key. There's no point killing people unless others are going to listen to that. And again, we're going to explore some of those themes in the workshop. Nelson Mandela, I'm going to read you this quote very quickly because this really does summarize it's difficult to make too many generalizations, but how terrorists feel. They're prepared to die for their cause. Now, again, from a criminological perspective, when we think about crime prevention, it's very difficult to stop a crime, prevent people from committing crimes when they actually have no sense of safety or security in terms of their own well-being. You know, if they don't mind getting caught, arrested, detained, or indeed, as you're probably aware, a lot of terrorists kill themselves as part of the act, so a suicide bombing, or indeed death by cop is one of the expressions used, but putting themselves in a position where ultimately they're going to be gunned down by armed police because they don't want to be caught alive. But this being prepared to die makes it a very difficult thing from the security and policing perspective to prevent. And you can see, I'm going to read the quote. I've dedicated my life to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I hope to live for and to see realised. But my Lord, if it needs to be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. And again, this kind of captures the sentiment of many, or indeed most, terrorists historically and indeed today. So how do they spread this fear? And LeCure suggests in 1976, and indeed nothing has changed, the media. The media are the terrorist's best friend. The terrorist act by itself is nothing, publicity is all. So if there was a terroristic bomb in a shopping centre and let's say 20 people are killed, if we didn't know about that, if that never got publicised, and that might take place in Australia or in Africa or in America, in England, in Wales, if we didn't hear about it, we wouldn't feel afraid about it. But the problem with today is media is everywhere. It surrounds our lives. We can't escape it. So an act committed anywhere on the globe can have a very personal and immediate effect on us at a local level. And we refer to this as this glocal village in terms of having external worldwide issues impact on us in a very immediate and local way. Margaret Thatcher in 1985, she said that the media is providing the oxygen of publicity. So if you think about a fire, if you take away the oxygen, that fire will go out. And what Thatcher is suggesting here is that really we need to limit the amount of attention that terroristic acts are getting. And this is happening, by the way, and again, we'll explore this in the workshop, where security forces across the world, governments across the world, they do try to kind of dumb down, to kind of blanket out the publicity of such events, to stop giving the terrorists this fuel that fuels their fire. And one of the issues today is that we, as a consequence of this global village, as a consequence of hearing about violence, are becoming desensitized to it. So the question I have for you then is, what level of violence or threat of violence is required to get your attention? You know, what's going to make you read the news? What's going to make you kind of step back and think, oh my goodness, that could have been me. That could have been my friend. It could have been one of my family members. What makes you start to think, I might be a victim of terrorism? And again, this varies from person to person in terms of their sense of security and how they perceive it. But all the time, the terrorists are looking to find a way to be bigger and better to get that attention. So the Twin Towers in 2001, the suicide, well, they took over the flights, the suicide pilots that went into the Twin Towers to drop the Twin Towers, and indeed other terroristic attacks that happened on that day. That caused global fear and insecurities. Our lives will never be the same again as a consequence of that act of terrorism. And there's plenty of other examples to illustrate that. Again, we'll discuss those in the workshop. But you need to think about that. What level of violence? And I suppose one of the more recent examples of a quite kind of a shattering in terms of a sense of our security, you know, make us all kind of step up and listen to what's going on and to read the news and to engage with what's going on, and indeed instill a sense of fear within us, was the Manchester Arena bombing that took place on the 22nd of May 2017. You might remember it was an Ariana Grande concert. I actually like Ariana Grande myself. I'm not sure I'd attend one of her concerts, but the type of audience you would expect to see there would be young people with their parents, you know, teenagers. So a very, and we use the word ideal victim in criminology for terrorists. You know, this is really going to make people step up and listen. Because if we don't feel safe attending an Ariana Grande concert, you know, where would we feel safe? So this is the bomber en route to the concert. You can see him walking along with the backpack that detonated in the arena. And again, something we'll look at and discuss as part of the workshop. But the consequence here, all of us feeling the impact, regardless of how close or, you know, maybe we knew victims of the Manchester Arena, how close we were, it affected us all at some level. And so the effect of terrorism is destabilizing of societies, undermining public confidence in security measures, making the police do more. And the more we have these exaggerated responses to terrorist attacks, the more impact it has on our lives. And this again is something we'll explore, looking at how we safeguard ourselves, how we allow security measures to impact on our freedoms in order to feel safe. And fear of terror, so this is the kind of what encapsulates this talk, but we're going to look at the psychological experience of this feeling of helplessness, and how then we allow securities, the police, the governments, to reduce our individual freedoms and autonomy, to be more restrictive in their government controls, to be more punitive in terms of penal policy and restrictions and that end. And we're going to look at this, how we routinely adapt our lives to avoid harm, danger and risk of indeed terrorism, but indeed other types of violence, and the ways in which the police, government and others control our actions and our movements as a consequence of the fear of terror that has on our lives. So I hope you join me on the 7th of July, where we can explore some of these key themes together. I look forward to meeting you all then, and you know, get in touch. My email is jfp@aber.ac.uk if you want to discuss it in advance of the talk. Thank you.